Hey there, welcome to Friendly Ties. This is a board gaming podcast, and today we're talking about fleeing a solar system as a sun explodes. This is Evacuation. So this is one of the hotter games right now.
This is also like the month of Evacuation on John Gets Games channel, right?
It really is. Yes. Yeah. I guess I should get that caveat out of the way right at the beginning. I was sponsored to make a video for this game. I made a full tutorial video. It should be out by the time this episode drops. I did buy it at Essen. That was kind of a convenient thing. They wanted me to make a video, and I was like, well, don't send it to me. I already bought it. But yeah, take all my opinions with a grain of salt, but I like this game. But I also have a lot of things to say about it.
Poor John. We looped him into, we had him to commit to making the podcast before he realized he was going to be like releasing 3 evacuation videos in a week.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And the last one was Nucleum. I'm such a shill. Anyway, this is the new design from Vladimir Sushi. Came out from Delicious Games, and it is a Euro game about fleeing a planet as its solar system, as its sun is exploding, and you're just trying to evacuate from the old planet to a new planet. And the game has a big board in the middle of the table with 2 big, beautiful planets on it, and you have 4 rounds to do it. And then you potentially score. This is kind of an odd game in that there's a couple main ways to play with like a race mode and a points mode. We're going to talk about all that stuff.
Yeah.
I just want to say that my favorite part of the art is actually the curvy, crazy line that goes between the 2 planets rather than the 2 planets themselves. That's the thing that actually really draws my eyes to
the board. It is compelling, yes.
And I will add is a cool mechanism in the game. That like travel track that you use between them is very satisfying. I dig this game. Evacuation. First of all, I'm a Vladimir Sushi fanboy. Not every game has landed with me of his, but it's definitely a designer that will pull my eye to the game anytime. Mm-hmm. And I love this idea of dismantling and then maybe remantling. I'm sure that's a real word. Ever since we did that episode on Empire's End earlier this year, right?
That's
like
right.
you all remember that,
was also
I was like, I really want to play this
Destroyer.
game for the theme, right? Like, and so that idea of like tearing apart your engines, and then in this game also like rebuilding them. Don't come at me about calling it an engine.
He did it to himself.
is definitely something that I think is really neat. So I'm drawn in by that idea. I really like in a game the challenge of not just necessarily building up, but essentially like managing between. And I think at its core, this game nails that idea. If that concept appeals to you, it does make you balance between the 2 worlds, and the idea that you are tearing this one down in order to make this new one great. It nails that theme as far as I'm concerned.
100%. You know, at its core, I feel like this game is like really just like super fancified, like pick up and deliver. Like I don't like in like a way. What?
Pick up a whole planet. Pick up a civilization. It's a
I
civilization.
I just like that. Keep going.
I
Keep going. Sorry.
No, I thought you were
that was
like
an
hating on
excited
it.
ooh.
Yeah, like I mean, like, and it's funny because I'm not a big pickup. I've yet to play a pick up and deliver game that I really like, but for some reason I find myself like, until this one, I guess, like if we're gonna call it that, but I always find myself like really drawn to them because I just find something really satisfying of being like, okay, like I'm gonna take these things, I'm gonna put them here, and I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna put it here, and like I feel like that's kind of what you're doing. Like you've got 2 planets, and you are literally moving your resources, your population and your resource production factories.
Yeah, the overall infrastructure.
From one to the other. And like, and at the same time, both of these economies are then producing things, and you're continuing, to kind of try and move things, back, not back, but forth, I guess, just always forth, moving things forth. But I just so like that idea of like, okay, cool, like this planet over here is going to be doing this planet over here is going to be doing this, and then I just got to figure out how I'm going to like pick this stuff up and get it over here before the end of the game. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that, but it's also only played over 4 years, which is essentially 4 rounds. So you don't have that many as many opportunities as you would think to be able to move your resources. So it becomes this incredibly beautiful dance of resource management and production engine manage all these things at once. It's really cool.
This game has a few neat mechanics. Like I'm such a sucker for like a neat mechanic in a Euro game, and this game's got a few of them. But the one that I think stands at the bottom, that doesn't make sense. The foundational one is the fact that you exist on both these planets. There are these three resources: it's energy, food, and steel, which seems like a low amount. It's a Euro game. It's a thinky Euro game, but there's only three resources, but you have to split them apart. You have old world steel and new world steel and old world food and new world food, and moving from one to the other is difficult. It's slow with your ships, and you got to get the production going. And I think that's the first thing where like you teach the game, you show it to people and like, oh, that's cool. And then like, from my experience teaching this a few times, 10 minutes in, people are just like, oh man, like, you know, like thinking about where it is and where it goes. Not that it's like an analysis paralysis thing, but more of a just like, this is funky and interesting.
It's weird.
Just like
It's
managing these two different planets. Like you really feel like a bureaucrat almost, like like managing the evacuation. I mean, the name makes sense. It's not like flee the game or like, you know, run away or like exploding sun. It's like evacuation. You are managing this evacuation. You have time to like, you know, we're going to send the steel factories and the food factories before the energy factories. And I don't know, I think it's really easy to lean into the theme on this one, which I don't normally care about, but I definitely feel like a space administrator trying to ferry civilization across the stars.
Yeah. I was trying to think about this, guys. Can you think of any other games where you have that? Like you have, you know, in so many games you collect resources, right? But like I was trying to think earlier of like other game examples where like you are basically have two completely separate resource generation engines, and they're separate, right? Like they don't cross over. They don't just go into one big pool. The only thing I could think of, which is actually not related at all, but it just reminded me of a little bit, was actually the winter and summer actions in viticulture, which again has nothing to do that's not creating two different resource pools, but it just reminded me of that, like that idea of like these, like you play two different sides of the board, but even in that game you play one side, then you all go play the other side. That's not how this is. You are kind of actively working both sides of your, you know, both planets in every round. And I couldn't come up with another game where I felt like I had two completely separate resource engines.
I can't think of an example of a game that does something like that, and I'm really racking my brain. I will say that I think that sounds really daunting, right? If you're listening to this podcast, you haven't played this game, and it's like, oh, you have to do double the work. One thing that I think is a very clean part of this game's design is that most of the numbers in this game are very, very simple. Like you're counting up ones and twos. Actually, you're really just counting up a lot of ones.
Yeah.
And like they go up to like 7, unless you're Anastasia and you get 15 somehow. But for the most part, like they count up to 7. And yes, you have to do it in 2 places, but you also kind of know they're flowing in one direction. And, you know, when you go to buy things in this game, it's like it costs 3 of this and 2 of that, or 2 of this and 1 of that. It's a heavy game, but the purchases, the numbers that go into it are no more complex than, you know, a game of Splendor or something like that.
Yeah. One of the a big end game purchase you did in the game we just did, it cost you like 6 things total. You built a stadium and
222.
Yeah, it 222.
Discounted by 1, so 221.
Yeah.
And he did it, and it was like, whoa, that's a huge stadium he just built. So like, yeah, that was right at the very end of the game, so that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I'll totally admit that I like Vladimir Suchy. I like Underwater Cities. I loved Messina 1347 from last year, which he co-designed or was a part of the design of from last year. So I knew I was gonna play it. Like it wasn't like a huge leap, but hearing those elements, I just thought, oh my God, like, you know, there's nothing I hate more than not having what I need when I need it, when I want it.
Where
These guys
you need
know
it.
where I need it. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, you want to like just let me just like have a meltdown. That is me. And so I was really worried about that in this game. And I got to tell you, yes, yes, that is possible and that is there. But Nick is right. The math is simple. It does it does trigger some AP. It does trigger a lot of thinking. There are moments where you're like, oh no, I didn't put this where I needed it, or I didn't. But the way the system works, the way things flow, when they flow, how they flow, there's a lot of opportunities for you to plan, kind of know what you need, and kind of be ready for what you need to do, and kind of adapt in any given moment. Like I haven't had as many feel bad moments as I expected to have with a game that of this weight, of this complexity, with these systems where there is like no resource crossover, which is again very thematic, as you said, John. You know,
I remember a ton of frustration with Messina with those feel bad moments.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. A lot less here. I think part of that is because this is a very multiplayer solitaire game. Like especially compared to Underwater Cities. And I think this game is going to be very frequently compared to Underwater Cities. I've done it, and I don't think that's necessarily wrong, but the core mechanic of Underwater Cities is worker placement. Vicious, brutal, mean
I was
going
to say, you were going to talk about like mean, like feel bad moments. I'm like, oh boy, Underwater Cities.
and Underwater Cities has neat ways to like try to get around it, but at its core,
100%.
it's worker placement and blocking. But in Evacuation, the way that the core action system is, I'm just doing my thing and you're just doing your thing. We have our board in front of us, and on your turn, you do an action. It's going to cost an increasing amount of energy, which you spend from your own pool, and you choose the actions in front of you. You don't even block yourself, let alone other people blocking you. If you keep hitting the same spot over and over again, it starts to cost a little bit more, but not even really that much. And so I think that is part of it. Like, there are 3 markets in the middle of the table where you can buy stadiums, infrastructure cards, and spaceships. And that is one of the 2 areas of interaction, really.
John says there's no interaction in this game, and he took a thing I needed, and I let off a litany of bad words, profanity at him in the middle of this game. So as much as it is multiplayer solitaire.
Yeah, but at the same time, and when you were saying that, you're like, I can't believe I telegraphed that. And I was like, you didn't telegraph that. That ship just had the thing. Like, I have no idea what you want. I'm so focused on my area that I'm frequently surprised at what can happen from things that are easily countable. There's this mechanic about progress that I'm sure we'll talk about, but it involves each of us having a progress amount. And I remember in the very first round, Nick was like, okay, I have 6 progress and I do this thing. And I was like, wait, what? I have 6 progress. And it's like, I could so easily have just glanced at Nick's board and seen that he was going to do this, but it didn't even occur to me. I think because I was in that multiplayer solitaire mind space, and I don't mean that negatively. For some people, that is a negative. I think it's something you should absolutely know going into this game, that it's very heads down. You kind of do your own thing together at the table.
But I'm curious, Nick, because you have a tendency, this is a credit to you, to be play a little bit smarter, a little bit faster than John and I. And by that, I mean that usually it's like a couple plays before John and I start to get to a point where we're starting to think about what other people are doing. You are already seeing it, which is why I sort of was like, oh, I bet Nick saw that I needed that, or like whatever. And so I'm curious from your perspective, if you still think this is like, do you really, it's just multiplayer. So like, how much were you paying attention to John and I, as we were playing?
I mean, the both of you have played a little bit more than I have, so I would say that we're probably on pretty similar levels, but I agree. I think it's multiplayer solitaire. You could argue that like, oh, like, with that ship that this person bought, like you could have looked over at their board and seen that they're taking gray things. So they're going to want the gray ship. So you really need to rush for that first. Or, the really good stadium is out there. So you're going to grab that good stadium before anyone else could grab the good stadium. But like, I'll say that those forms of interaction, I don't think are terribly interesting. And, and the puzzle in this game is interesting, but the interaction is not. And I think that even if you're like very cognizant of what other folks are doing in this game, at a certain point, like you can only do what you can do. Like if you look and they're like, oh, they want to ship over yellow people and I don't care about that, you're not going to do anything about it. Like, this
Yeah.
is not a game
Yeah.
where getting in anyone's way is at all worth your
Yeah,
effort.
you don't have enough actions. In fact, I did something in the game we just finished that got in John's way, and I just like had deep regret because it didn't actually pan out being better for me.
And you weren't trying to block me either.
I wasn't, but the only value is that it somehow was not good for John because I took something that he needed. But but I do think that what the interaction in this game, for as little as there is, what that interaction does do is create a lot of tension, or at least for me, because you guys know I love to build my sandcastles and like not like have them execute. There is I think a fair amount of tension in terms of, am I going to be able to place on the spot that I need to place on, or am I going to be able to take the thing that I need to take? Nick is right. I don't know that interaction is particularly interesting, but it does add a bit of tension, I do think.
The race to settling is a part of the interaction we haven't mentioned that is probably the most significant part of the interaction. But there's just so many like decent places that it's like, if you don't get the one perfect placement, like it's probably okay. Certainly there are some circumstances where you really need the particular thing, but I don't know. Yes, it can be interactive, but like you need to be at a level of this game that I think most people aren't going to get to, honestly. Unless your group just plays this a ton. And again, like I think that's totally okay. But as John was saying earlier, they're like, you just need to be aware that this is a heads down solitaire game, and it's well worth it if you like those kinds of games.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think Nick just said a very important word in that last bit, and that was the race to put things down onto the new world. The new world is a big hex grid. There's some restrictions for where you can place, and there's definitely reasons why you might want to go in certain spots. But I would say, going to the tension that Anastasia was just mentioning, the tension is in how much can I do before these 4 rounds are up? Like 4 rounds does not feel like that much, and you are racing yourself and your opponents, but it almost feels more like a drag race than like a Formula One on the same track. Like we're all kind of doing similar things, but and who can get there faster. And specifically harping on that word, there are 2 main ways to play this game. The first way, and according to the rulebook and the designer, primary way to play this game is called race mode. The other way is to play points mode, and I think we should probably talk about race mode now, because I think a lot of stuff orients around.
We should talk about both. We need to. We need to go into this.
So
for sure.
The rulebook recommends that you without anything else pushing you, the default should be playing race mode, and it recommends you play the first game in race mode. And I agree that the first time you play this game, it really should be the race mode. I think
we all agree with that.
And
I think do you still agree with that, Nick?
No, I really hate race mode.
Oh, but I think you need it. I think you need it. But
so let's talk about it a little bit more. Like,
so you know what the other part of the design is?
Exactly. So race mode is essentially the strict goal of the game is just get your infrastructure going on the new world. You're racing to get those 3 things. It's food, steel, and energy. You're racing to get all of your production on the new world to 8 or more, and you need to construct or have 3 stadiums on the new world, which is kind of a weird mechanic, but I guess thematically it's just like the happiness of your people. So you want to have productive, happy people on the new world. And when you play the race mode, the game ends.
And you need to wait, hold on. And you need to have evacuated your entire.
You don't.
You don't?
No, you don't.
What?
That's not a requirement for race mode. It says you probably should evacuate the planet fully, but you don't have to in order to trigger the end of the race. And
wow.
Yeah, and when somebody triggers the end of the race, the game functionally ends immediately. So you don't necessarily play through the 4 full rounds. Then you count up some quote-unquote points, and you mostly take penalties for, the stuff that people haven't evacuated yet, and various things like that. And then one person is going to win, and the winning score is going to be something like 9 or 12 or 10, like a really, really small number.
It's what honestly feels a bit arbitrary.
The first time we played, the 3 of us all together, I beat Nick by 1 happiness on the tiebreaker. And so that's kind of what I mean by like winning is like a case of just a handful of points here or there. So it's very kind of one-dimensional in its goal, obviously, but in the race mode, the most jarring part is the fact that it can just end early. And in fact, every time I've played race mode, it has ended early. It's jarring in a Eurogame. That's like 2 hours long, and you have all these plans. The carpet just gets ripped out right from underneath you. I remember in that first game with you, Nick, it was also your first play, but we started the 4th round, and the end of the game was triggered 2 actions into the 4th round. We almost didn't even have a 4th round, and that was pretty unsatisfying.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about race mode is like I see why it exists, right? And to a certain extent, it's simpler. We're going to talk about points mode in a minute, but it is a simpler way to play the game. It is cleaner to a certain extent. We talked in the past about Anno 1800, and that's a game that sort of similarly has like this arbitrary moment where the game can end, and suddenly you're like, oh my god, like. And we played a game once of that where Nick ended it like 5 turns in or something ridiculous. Yeah. Like we played for like 25 minutes and it was over. And we've also played games of that have gone on and on because like nothing ended it, right? Mm-hmm. But I think the difference between a game like that and a game like this is that because of the way the rounds work, because of the intricacies, the efficiencies, the mechanisms of like, I'm going to move this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to wait and I'm going to do that. And you're like all the plotting, all that multiplayer solitaire happening. And then for one person in a game that is not otherwise particularly interactive, as you said, to just be like, cool, I did it, I'm done. It's like you're not paying attention enough to those people.
Yeah, you're like, wait, what? No, I don't want to be done.
Yeah. And kind of like what Nick said, like, there's not a lot you can do. The actions, the ability for you to do things, there's only... you have lots of options, but there's only so much you can do. And a lot of that is because you're doing kind of like one thing after another. So if you needed 4 actions to kind of like execute the bulk of your plan, like you're screwed, and that is not a great feeling when you've really, truly invested in the infrastructure that you're building, invested in getting your people off the plane. Like it is a game that feels very thematic, as John said. And you've spent time doing that. So I'm glad to have played it. I would play it again with new players because I do think there's a lot going on in this game. I even saw it on you, Nick. Like, you were the smartest board gamer I know, but even in that first play, you were like, whoa, there are a lot of things that are like happening here. And I do think that if we'd thrown you into points mode and action cards and those things, you would have gotten it because you're you, but like, I still think I think there's something to be said for, I very rarely say this, but I think that this is a game where I do think the quote beginner mode, or even if Suchi says this is the mode, whatever, I think the race mode is, I do think it's worth playing once, just to get your feet wet in the game. But that's me.
Yeah. I mean, I do also want to point out that just because you end the race doesn't mean that you win. When the first time I taught it to you, Anastasia, you triggered the end. And I beat you on, again, the tiebreaker, which makes it sound like there's a lot of ties when you're playing in the race mode, because it's just like, who is eligible to win? Okay, and then check your happiness. Yeah. So, Nick, you were thinking that maybe you don't think you should start with the race mode.
I want to hear Nick's thoughts on race mode because he hasn't said them yet.
I mean, I don't care for, as you said, so many of them just end in a tiebreaker for a thing that the tie-breaking thing, the smiley faces, don't feel important enough in the course of the game that they then suddenly become the tiebreaker at the end of the game. Yeah. I find it very dissonant with what I am doing through the course of the game. Mm-hmm. And frankly, race mode is not the only thing that's going to come under fire from me here, because we're going to pivot to talking about points mode here. And frankly, I don't really love points mode either. And you're going to be really confused listening to this podcast, hearing me say that 15 minutes ago, I said, I love this game and you should play it. And that's true. But that's because I really love the playing of this game. I shouldn't assume, but I'm going to assume, I really feel like the design of this game was so cool. It's so satisfying to play. You move these pieces between one another. And then it was like, well, okay, how do I gamify? How do I make it so that like someone wins this game that you play against other players, and it's not super interactive. So someone's got to win. And so they like landed on, you have this like race thing, and then they landed on this like points thing, and they're like, nah, let's put them both in. And they both are like very mediocre end game scoring things. I find them both to be very dissatisfying for the process that I went through over the course of the game. And I find that to be very odd for me. Like, I generally, the whole thing needs to gel for me to like a game, but I've really liked playing this game. I really want to keep playing this game because fiddling with it is really fun. Making the things work is very satisfying. But then when we go to count the points at the end, I'm like, that's what's important? Like, it doesn't feel right somehow. And maybe that's just a reflection of me not appropriately understanding what's important in the game. But I think race mode, of the two of them, particularly pushes you towards, hey, this is the thing that's most important. And to me, that feels wrong.
I love that you just said that, because you just captured for me the thing that like I have been grappling with since we finished playing. So before we started recording this tonight, you know, we sat down, we played a 3-player game. We played in points mode, which we will talk about, I swear, in just a second. It was my 6th play of the game. I've played it 3 times 2 players, 2 times 3 players, 1 times 4 players. Played it all different ways. Points mode, race mode. The only thing I haven't played yet is the modules. There's a couple of additional modules, which maybe will help with what I too have been feeling, which is basically like I'm having like the time of my life playing this game. Like this game, I'm trying to reduce my collection, but I have already pre-ordered this game.
I didn't know that.
I fell for Nucleum too. Both of them. All right. I got rid of a lot of games. I can add 2 new ones this year. All right.
Fair enough.
I really enjoy it. I want to share it with people. And for that, I'm loving it. It's a great game, and I do want to keep playing it. I think that the only thing that like honestly, it almost like makes me sad, because it is exactly what Nick was kind of hitting on, is that we go to count up the points in points mode, and I just feel like I'm bad.
You're
like
not
I'm
very
just
good
bad.
at it.
I'm not very good at it, and I like hate that. I think I'm like playing so well. I've done all these things. I've got all this stuff going on.
You took like 9 actions compared to my
I
5
did.
in the last round. You had 1,000,000 energy,
and
then the scores were like,
it makes me hate Sean, who I love dearly, because he I'll be like, I did everything so good, and then he will be like, he'll have his like 3 end game action cards or whatever. Like, we should talk about how you get points in this stupid game, but whatever. And he'll just have more of everything, right? And then he did that twice in a row. Nick's done that twice in a row. Nick always does that to me, but now here John's doing it to me too, and I'm like, I can't. It was not, and they're like being cute, like, oh, it's close. I'm like, for you too, it's close. I'm like 25 points behind them. This is unimportant, but like, I don't know why I'm bad at it. And I guess the thing is, like,
it kind of like pulls the rug out from under you. You're like, I'm having fun. Oh,
I think I'm killing it, and then I'm not. And I think I feel like that part of that's because I need to parse better, like what gives me points and how. And there are so many things to do about that. John, please, God, tell the people how you get points in this game so I can keep talking.
Points mode. So yeah, when you play points mode, you first and very importantly, you play all of the 4 rounds. There's no game ending early, so you can plan for all this stuff to happen. And then at the start of the game, everyone gets you do a draft essentially for 3 end game goal cards, and so you'll have these all game long. They're technically hidden, but you do a hand draft, so you can have a suspicion about what other people have in front of them. And for example, in the game we just played, my 3 goals, one of them was have a bunch of spaceships, and spaceships are how you actually transport. The second one was have a bunch of energy, and you literally need energy to power your ships and to take the actions of the game. And then my 3rd goal was just try to settle a specific part of the planet. And so I was focusing on those things. And the last time we played, one of my goals was infrastructure cards. And so I focused on having lots of infrastructure. So it very much leans into that, I don't know, very well-trodden field of Euro games of like, here's part of the game that you do better or you score better. So, focus on that. And I like that it's a hand draft. So it's not just like, here's some random goals, do what you can. It's like, okay, you're drafting, you're passing around, and then you're trying to come up with kind of a synergy. And then you also score potentially a pile of points for your production. You're just trying to have them be equal. You score based off of your lowest production value. And then you might suffer penalties if you don't have enough stadiums and if you haven't evacuated enough people off the planet and all those things. But the game is very much about those three goals. The play of points mode orbits entirely around those three cards, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that there are a couple of additional modules that you can add in that add a couple of additional ways to score.
Like public goals and like line majority things. We haven't actually tried those, yeah.
No, but I will say that I do want to play with them next time, because I do think that like what I have felt in the couple of games, I guess now 4 games that I played in points mode, was that honestly, for all the things that you're doing in this game, the way that you're scoring points I feel like I need it's like throwing more darts. I need more ways. I need more ways to score points, because clearly I'm not good at maximizing the points available to me.
I kind of
so
understand
just give me
that.
a couple more options.
Maybe these points will work for me.
Yeah. No, I kind of get that. I mean, the game comes with like a little score pad, and when we just played this game, the three of us, and we were writing down all the scores. And I definitely had a moment, and this is my 5th play. I've played points mode a couple times as well, and I had a moment writing them down like, oh, that's it. Like, it's the production, it's
That's
these
it.
3 goals, and then you maybe get a few points for happiness, and that's really it. It's these 4 things: production, goal 1, goal 2, goal 3.
And I feel like if you're not good, given how we've played, like John and Nick with the goal cards, they each maximized all 3 goal cards. Now, in most Euros that you play where you have goal cards, like maybe you maximize
Focus 1 or 2, yeah.
1 or 2, or no, you have to do all of them, and you better do them all perfectly, right?
While
I mean,
also
I get
crushing your production.
Well, also crushing your production, while also getting all your people off the planet, while also having the most happy faces. But then that's it, right? Like, and don't get me wrong, that's our table, that's our group, that's this space. But I think I do like having point options, right? And in a game like this, where like I felt like I guess apparently did nothing better than them, so I don't know. But I felt like I did. I felt it.
Yeah.
Stockpiled energy better than we did.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That is very true. And you had a goal to have energy factories.
But
constructed.
you had the goal to have energy production, and there's no way to get additional goals. There's no way to change goals.
Yeah.
So there is you can kind of maybe know where you are in the game before it ends, just based on how well you've accomplished the things that are available, which, is fine. That's a game. But to Nick's point, I don't. The points at the end are my least favorite part of the game.
Yeah, playing it is so satisfying. But the you draft these things, and most of the goals are like, do the things that you would be doing already anyway, but then like do yours, I guess, a little bit more, because frankly you can't really ignore most of what you're doing in this game. This isn't a game where you like learn it and you're like, oh, I'm going to focus on this one aspect of the game. Like when you play this game, and it's part of the reason why I think we're advocating for playing the race mode or the beginner mode or whatever you want to call it at the beginning, is like, well, frankly, you're going to do all the things. There's no, I'm going to pick and choose control my little domicile over here or something like that. Like you're going to do all of it. You have to do all of it. And so I think part of the reason that the points mode, like Anastasia is saying, doesn't like resonate with me so much is because, I don't know, it doesn't feel super special. Like when we were like scoring up like this last game, and like we looked at like the comparison like between John's and my scores, instead of like adding down the column, it was easier to just be like, all right, I'm up 2 here, I'm down 1 here, I'm up 3 here, I'm down 5 here. And like that's just an example to say like how it feels like it's going to be a point salad-y count them all up at the end, but at the end of the day it's like it's not. And
it's honestly just like a modification of the race mode elements. It's just the finish line has moved to a different place.
Well, but at least in points mode, you get to play all the way to the end. Yeah. And so even if you are a player who is losing the game or who is behind tempo or something like that, you still have the opportunity to complete the evacuation, right? And like in the sense that that right one of my working theories about like what are games that people have decided that they really love, and in a lot of them it's that people get to build something, and in this one, you know, you're kind of building something, which is a new place that you all ran off to. And so in race mode, having abruptly ended it and not getting to do all the things sucks. Whereas in points mode, even if I don't like the way that the points score, at least I've gotten to do all of the things that I've set out to do. And I think that this game has a nice tempo and pacing to it. It doesn't to me feel like it overstays its welcome or takes too long. You feel like you're under the wire as you kind of get to the end there. And then, you know, I imagine when you're quite good at it, then you're like, okay, cool. Now I'm going to do these extra things or build a flourishing metropolis instead. So it's good. So it's going to be a little bit extra. And I think that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, and the timing of when you do those things is Nick's right. You have to do everything in this game, but when you do it can change. I mean, we played with our friend Dave, and he was like, "I'm not going to ship any ships until the end," which I think John and
he's
I
like,
thought
"I'm
was,
just going to wait to evacuate until the last possible second."
Which was like insane. Like I was like, what? Like, but it worked for him, and the way that he
didn't win, but he came really close.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the way that these things play out, so you can kind of change. I'm adding that in because like there's this, you know, that can be like one. Okay, speaking of Messina 1347, when we all played that game last year, we talked about how like there almost was like this track that you felt like you had to kind of follow. It's like, okay, the years go and you have to kind of do these things and kind of follow the arc of the story. There are all these things you have to do, but when and how you do them, that's entirely up to you. It's like Nick said, you are managing this thing and how you want to do it, how you decide to manage your, you know, evacuation machine here, like that's on you. But you know, you better do it in 4 years because the sun's going to explode or whatever.
So I do struggle a little bit separating my love for the advanced action card module from also my enjoyment of the points mode. We've talked about these two things, and we're going to talk about those cards in just a second. I want to share just a brief anecdote. I bought this game at Essen. I got it back, and I was really excited to play it. I played it with a couple of friends. Wasn't any of you, though, and I taught it. It was a rough teach just because it was the first time playing, and I didn't understand it. We played race mode with no extra modules, and I remember I got home, and I told you all, I played it. You know, we were chatting online, and you're like, "What'd you think?" And I was like, "I had fun." And I remember Nick was like, "Oh no!" Like you know, like it's not good. Like you know, like reading between the lines. John's not excited. He thinks it's just kind of whatever. And then I played it in the points mode for the first time. Was my third play, I think. But we also used these advanced cards, and I was just like hopping. I was like hopping up and down. I was having so much fun. And so let's talk about these cards, because the advanced cards is a module that you can play in either mode. We've only played it in points mode so far, but you can do it with either.
Can you really? I didn't realize you could use them in race mode. Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, the advanced action cards are freaking bomb. They are fire.
the thing that launches this into the stratosphere or whatever for me. Because I have enjoyed my games of this one in race mode without the cards. It was a better playing time than not playing any game at all, which is like not a resounding endorsement.
It is faster.
It's like 6 out of 10 or something like that.
It is a faster game in race mode.
Yeah. But then we bring these cards in. So when you don't play with the cards, the way the actions work is you just trigger actions that are static on your board. You always have the same set, no matter when you're playing this or where you're playing this. It's the same ones, same options, and you could do a lot of interesting things with those things. But when you play with the cards mode, you will have a hand of action cards, 4 of them at the start of every turn, and you have to play one of these cards. And you either put it face down to activate one of the standard actions like you normally have, or you put it face up and you get to do what the card says. And there's like 80 cards or something like that, and they're all, you know, there's a lot that are similar, but still they run the gamut of different combinations of actions and discounts and bonuses and extra penalties, but gives you extra progress and just like a huge variety of stuff, to the point where I get this like endorphin hit, like, what's in the box? Like, I got to draw a new card, and maybe it's going to save my butt because I didn't realize that I desperately need one more steel. And then I draw a card that says build a spaceship, and you can convert one resource into another. And I'm just like falling out of my chair. Like, that's perfect. It's not always like that. Sometimes you have a hand of cards that doesn't work, but I love that element. And, coming back to the start of this kind of new segment here, maybe I just love the cards mode, and because I played the advanced cards in points mode, I'm like, therefore I love points mode. So it does make me wonder what race mode would be like with the cards.
The cards are awesome. Strong agree. I think it's because it makes the decision space of the action you're going to take on your turn surprisingly wide.
Yeah.
There's a handful of different kinds of actions you can take throughout the course of the game. And, you can buy this or that, or, place this or that down. And, you play the first time, you're like, okay, cool. Those are all my basic actions. And it's kind of interesting because I can decide to essentially, move more on the progress. We haven't really talked about progress, but move more on progress and take X action instead of Y action. The advanced action cards then essentially say, look, it's all the same actions, but it might have this exception, or it might have this bonus, or it actually might even let you take 2 actions, but you have really crappy progress at the end of the turn. And so do you want to do any of these things? Because if you do, they're awesome and they're more efficient than what I guess I'll refer to as the basic actions, the default actions. But hey, you know what? If you don't want to, you can still take the default actions anyway. And so you can still always execute the plan you want to, but if you're able to be responsive to the cards in your hand, you get a little, frosting, and that can make a big difference. And I think that's part of the very satisfying flow of the game, is responding to those cards and feeling that flexibility.
Yeah.
It's funny that you used frosting, because I was just about to make an analogy to say that, Nick is kind of we haven't really talked about the progress track, but I'm going to just talk about it for a minute here, because I feel like it is like the extra drizzle, or the extra frosting, or the thing that kind of brings, I can't find the right food analogy, that like brings the whole game together.
Is it the gluten?
I was going to say it was the noodles and the chicken noodle soup, but I just wasn't going. Already, you have a really interesting game between, these 2 planets and the engines that you're building and the pick up and deliver and all of these things. But as Nick is talking about, like, the act of playing these cards, each card gives you a certain amount of movement that you will move along this track that kind of winds between the 2 planets if you look at the board. And the mini game that is figuring out how to play those, because the amount of movement that you want, and there's again some interaction here, because how it's not guaranteed, depending on if you're going to get to choose to move first, but there are kind of bonuses along that track. Where you are on that track changes where you can build, what areas of the new planet you can build on, how many resources you get from the old planet, because you're moving satellites further and further away, so you don't have as many resources. And you are playing this mini game by playing your cards. There are bonuses that you get at the end. Another way to play, shocking,
Mm-hmm.
is how whether or not you have to get those bonuses exactly. And I remember my first play of this, I was like obsessed with playing the right. I mean, I was spending all this time sitting there like counting, like, okay, this card gave me 4 movement and then 3 movement, and then I was like,
Yeah, you got to hit 11. You got to hit 11.
I had to hit it exactly, and that element is still kind of there. And to Nick's point, you can play the main actions, you can play the actions in your card. You have these choices, but there's this another layer at play of how much movement do I want? And I think that putting that layer, that element, that frosting onto the game is like the piece that brings everything together for me.
The progress tracker is very cool, and so far I've mostly played very like low and slow on it, because you get rewarded for moving slowly. And I'm not sure if the game does that as kind of a consolation prize or if it does it sort of as like a limiting factor, like right to essentially say like, oh, if you're going crazy on movement, then it's going to kind of bust the game wide open. But I'm very curious to see like what it looks like if you just kind of shoot out really quickly and how the game flows. And there's also something, again, it's mostly a Euro with numbers, but there's something actually like thematically satisfying. It's like as your two command nodules, or what are John, what are they like officially called? You're like AI,
they're artificial intelligence, like logistics satellites or something like that.
yeah. So as and you have two of them, and as you move them further, like they must be within a certain amount of range of each other so they can communicate to each other. And as they move farther away from your starting planet, you lose certain efficiencies, and so therefore like fewer, like less production on your starting planet. But then it allows you to access, more difficult to reach regions on the new planet. And as you get even closer to the new planet, then those synergies start transferring over there as your, little AI nodules like start creating the efficiencies over there. And there's something very cool about that transition. And a number of games do this, but I'm constantly impressed at how much more the decision space is when you are not moving on one track, but you're moving two things on one track. Because you're like, oh, well, I could move this one a lot and this one a little, or this one, what if I move them in tandem with each other? And a point of interaction in this game is if you have fewer happy faces and therefore are going later in the turn, then you have to, you might want to avoid where your opponents went to because they've already kind of snatched up the bonus that they get for going there. So that movement, I think, it's just cute. And again, the decision space is surprisingly deep for not hard math, right? There's nothing challenging about it from a cerebral taxation perspective, but just from what's the right call for me right here? It's just satisfying, very satisfying.
Yeah. I've enjoyed the variety it can also bring. Coming back a little bit to points mode. The first time I played points mode, I had a goal that essentially said max out the progress track.
I had that one tonight. Yeah.
Yeah, you did. And because of that, I remember when I played that, the game is 4 rounds long, and in that first round, I went 15 or 17 progress.
He went
which
nuts.
Which is
nuts.
a lot.
I was so jealous. Yeah.
Frequently you go 5 or 7 or 8 or maybe 10, but I went 15 in the first round. I went 19 in the second round. I would just pedal to the metal like crazy, strictly because I had this goal that was max out the progress track. And I actually remember the very, very first time I played this one, we finished the game and none of us got more than 2/3 down this track. And I remember we all kind of sat there and we're like, is it even possible to get to the end of this track? Because near the end of the track, it unlocks an area of the board to build on. And we're like, how can you ever build in the ocean area if it's so hard to get your progress token there? And then I've played games now where I've easily gotten to that point, and I can actually build a forest in the second round and then a sea in the third round because I was so focused on big progress numbers with my actions. And that is just one way that you can go, but it's not one is more powerful than the other, because, and I love this idea, I mentioned before that energy is what you pay to do actions. The more actions you do, the more energy you spend. But you store energy on 2 planets, right? The whole idea of this game is there's stuff in 2 places. And at the beginning of the game, you have to spend energy from the old world because the satellites are close to the old world. Once you move the satellites a certain distance, you can start to use energy on the new world and the old world. And once you move them even further, you can't use energy on the old world at all anymore. And remember, at the beginning of the game, that's where everything is. That's all of your infrastructure. So I think in that game that I played, where I just went pedal to the metal, I found myself going into the, I think, 3rd round, and I wasn't able to use any of the energy that was being made on the home planet anymore for actions. You could still use it to power your spaceships and all that kind of stuff, but I remembered thinking, oh crap, I haven't built enough energy production infrastructure on the new planet to adequately utilize the fact that I now need that for being able to do stuff. And that's just really, there's so many smart things wrapped up into that progress track. It really is a neat element to the game.
It really is, and I think the last piece of it is actually that you have these goal cards at the end of every round that reward you, as we sort of already mentioned, for if you move. They basically balance it, right? So that, because like John said, if you move really far, you unlock more options. But then, of course, you can't move. It's a tug of war. You can't move too far too fast because you need to make sure you have energy from the right places. But then there are some additional incentives. So if you move like not that far, then you're going to get some additional bonuses, and those bonuses actually seem to be better the less that you
They're essentially
move.
free actions. Like they
Exactly.
they are frequently the things that you normally spend a whole action and a pile of energy on. Yeah.
Exactly. So they kind of are also there, kind of limiting you, kind of slowing you down if you want them. But then there are going to be some turns where like, wait, I'm not going to go for that because I need to just get further. So you always kind of have these choices. There's always something that feels good there. And again, to go back to the action cards, which are, as we said, that they're fantastic, is that the really good ones could be zero. They're just zero movement, or one movement. And so when we first started playing with them, I remember like the first like 2 rounds, and it's only a 4-round game. I'm like, I have 4 progress movement because I played, 3 zero cards.
1, 0,
yeah. Because I'm like playing my best card. So again, the decision space is like, well, I need to actually play over here. I need to take a main board action because it just gives me more movement, or I need to do this. I need to play this card, which is actually the less efficient action, but it gives me so much more movement. So it's not. I'm not going to call it multi-use cards, but it's just like multi-possibility choices. They're like how you use them, and I think it's really cool.
Yeah. This is one of the more Underwater Cities elements to the game, I would say, as well. Because, Underwater Cities, you always play a card with a worker, and then you draw a new card at the end of your turn. So I definitely felt some similar vibes there, and I really enjoyed that element in Underwater Cities, too. Like, ooh, what card am I going to draw, and what kind of benefit is it going to give me? But the big difference between these two games with relation to those cards is that in Underwater Cities, they are like a supplemental type of benefit to the main worker placement action that you're doing, whereas in Evacuation, it's your whole action. It entirely encompasses the whole thing that you do on that turn, and because of that, I think they could be just a lot more interesting. Like the number of times where I draw like the perfect amazing card in Evacuation compared to Underwater Cities, I feel like the high is a lot higher. You're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, versus Underwater Cities being like, oh yeah, that card's pretty good. I'll play that and get 1 extra kelp.
Yeah, well, since we're talking about the progress track, I think this is a good segue into talking real quick just about the 2-player, 3-player, the 2-player experience particularly. Sure. Because in the 2-player game, that's pretty much the only scaling is this progress track. There's a couple of lanes. Each lane, some of the lanes have like better benefits or otherwise, and one of those lanes goes away. So that competition of who has the most happiness and is going to go first is just a little bit stronger here, and then the benefits that they're going to get. Now, before we talk about this, I will caveat for all of us that we actually played the game incorrectly in all of our 2-player plays. The lane that we were blocking, at least half of it, we had blocked the wrong
the
lane.
rulebook was surprisingly vague, and we blocked the more punitive lane, which meant we had much meaner 2-player games.
Yeah, and less good feelings, I think, about how aggressive, exactly how punishing it was to play by blocking that. But nevertheless, it is still much tighter. There is still it can be a little bit punishing if you are not the leader on that track, and it can be a little bit of a runaway leader on who is the leader on Happy Faces and stuff like that. So I'm curious to hear your guys' thought on the 2-player game. I need to play the 2-player game more. I think that I've got some reservations about the 2-player game, but I need to play it correctly to really kind of know how I feel about it. But I'm really curious what you guys think.
Sure. I mean, one would assume that this game is best at 2 players because it is so multiplayer solitaire, in that generally just like, well, if you're not really interacting much, then the less people, the better, because it's going to be a quicker game. It's just less
Right.
people taking turns. There's no balancing to take less actions in a 4-player game than a 2-player game or something like that. Like a 4-player game will generally probably be about twice as long as a 2-player game. And I am surprised to say that after having played every player count, I don't really have much of a preference between them. I mean, again, we did not play 2-player correctly, but I still really enjoyed that play, and I didn't really notice that we'd played it wrong until the two of you played it incorrectly, and you're like, wow, 2-player is really harsh. And it's like, oh, well, we actually screwed that up. So I don't know. For me, I don't have strong feelings. I've liked it at all the counts. I mean, faster is better. Our 3-player game tonight took like 2.5 hours, so like it's not the shortest game in the world.
I agree. I'm not so perturbed one way or another. I do think that the knocking out the wrong lane in the 2-player game is pretty punishing. I still think that there's going to be some level of higher tension. Like 3-player is probably the most open version of this game, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
in 4 players there's just more people, and in 2-player you knock out one of the 2 lanes. So I've not played it at 4-player. I imagine that feeling of
It's true.
I can't
Yeah,
go
4-player.
anywhere when, especially
Yeah.
when you're last, like
Yeah.
is gonna be pretty similar. And that's I think that's just the way it is. I think that there's still enough space in this game, and there's enough heads downness that, like, yeah, you might not get quite as good a thing. You don't get this Benny, but like it's probably okay.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when you're playing in the cards mode, because the cards
Yeah.
give you ways to get around the things that you don't have. When the very first game I played with
Yeah.
Anastasia, we weren't playing with the cards. And I distinctly remember I think we tied on happy faces, but I went before her in this round, so it inverted, so she went before me. And then she went to the progress spot that I needed, and then she proceeded to build on a spot that I was desperately trying to build towards. And I remember being like, oh, crap, I need to come up with a new game plan because it's impossible for me to build there this round. But there's no such thing as the word impossible when you're playing with the cards mode.
With
And
cards, yeah.
I mean, the play we just did, we were in the 3rd round, and I started the round. I was like, cool, I'm the only person who can build in the desert. Yay, me. I don't have to worry about it at all. And the whole time, Anastasia's just in the corner, like, snickering because she has a card that says she can play in the desert. And I didn't even realize that. She
I
didn't
did
end
that
up
to
blocking
both
me
of
or
you,
anything.
actually,
Yeah.
because Nick kept being like, nobody has 2 sons, right? And I was like, well, and he's like, well, but I'll still have another turn. I was like, theoretically, you'll still, like, I was basically trying not to tell him I had a card that was going to do exactly what he didn't want me to do, but I also like didn't want him to be sad that he was like, because I hate that feeling where you're like, okay, no, I'm good, right? And it's like, well, no, you're really not good because you don't know what are in people's hands. You just don't, you know. There's a lot of game breakingness in that. I don't call it game breakingness. That's too much. It's just a lot of possibilities in those cards. And so, you know, you guys are totally right. You know, I love it sometimes when we talk on this podcast because I'll come in with a feeling. I'll be like, I don't know, guys. And then we'll talk it through. I'm like, I take it all back. Just ignore me. Because it's true. Nick's right. Block the wrong lane. That is kind of punishing. But, you know, I think what it is that happy faces, so that I get it. I know why happiness exists. I know why you're trying to collect these happy faces. I know why you're trying to build stadiums. But it's just like Messina 1347, where you need to like repopulate Messina. It's just not the most fun part of the game to me. Like you build stadiums, they don't do anything else, right? Like other than needing to have them so I don't get negative points, they don't give me points. They don't like. And I shouldn't even say that, right? Because yes, by having the most, you get to go first. And that is really powerful in this game. But I don't necessarily want to do that. Once I'm behind, I feel behind, and I don't want to like spend my whole year like gathering the resources to just and they're expensive too, right? Like you have to spend a bunch of resources to do them. We haven't even talked that much about infrastructure, which is a whole other thing, which is like kind of like basically mapping, you know, having things in certain places, and that increases your production. I mean, there's other elements in this game and things to spend your stuff on. And so I do think the stadiums, the happy faces are like the one area, and this is probably why I suck at this game. So don't listen to me talk anymore here. But that's probably something that I need to kind of like step back and be like, hey, you know, this is a piece of the game. You got to focus on this a little bit more if you want to control this more. But it's not my favorite part. And so that's probably why in the 2-player game in particular, it's important, because turn order is important. It's like any Euro game where you're like, I don't want to take the action where I get to be first player. Well, sometimes you need to do it, you know?
Yeah. I think that I agree. The weakest part of this game is stadiums and happiness as a mechanic. Going back to the race mode, right? We were talking about it's just kind of weird. And that's
fascinating.
the
That's also the most important thing.
It's like the most
Sushi's
important
probably
thing. But yeah, while you're playing the game, the stadiums are
trying
just
to tell you it was super important,
they're
but
just
you don't
not.
like it.
They're not something you want to be focusing on. It's funny. I want to say the stadiums feel like the feed your people mechanism, but this game actually has a feed your people mechanism that I don't mind. Like you have to feed your people food in this game, but like the stadiums are just like all these shiny things I want to do, and then it's like chores. It's like, and then I guess I gotta build a stadium as well. I'm gonna work a stadium into all these super cool, fun activities that I want to do.
Gotta make them happy.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't they understand? I populated, I fed them,
Yeah.
I'm building infrastructure. Why do we need to be happy?
I
don't
can't help
understand.
but wonder if the game could have worked with the stadium happiness mechanic completely excised. I don't know. It does feel tacked on is an overstatement because it is integrated into a lot of the technologies, which is another thing we haven't talked about. There's a lot going on in this game, but I don't know. It really does feel like, it's Pluto orbiting at the very perimeter of the mechanics of this game and not really central to all these other things that do kind of work together. Like without any incentives, I would already want to build ships, and I'd already want to construct factories, and I would already want to do all these things. But without a big stick or sort of Damocles or whatever, like hovering over your head, ready to smack you with penalties for stadiums, you would never build them, right? I mean, I guess, yeah. Turn order, but I don't know. They're not fun. They're boring.
I think it's because they don't really do anything like the technologies, right? So the techs in this game, I think, actually are pretty cool. You have like a different track. I like the way that they randomize the setup for them. They are, Euro technologies. It's like you do a thing and you get this little, this thing's a little bit cheaper. You can cheat at this thing a little bit. And I think
they are tech trees, and I think that is cool. And like you said, and randomized tech trees.
Yeah. I think that, and I think they're nicely structured, and they so far have felt relatively fair. Like some feel a little bit better on one board than another, but I've not like played through and been like, oh my God, you're playing that set. Like they feel all very reasonable. But now it's time for me to bring up my hot take question, and it stems from the text, is that I think that it feels like the rules in this game are not the tightest, the cleanest, especially when it comes to the technologies. And like, the game uses the word gain and take and choose, and these things are like not entirely clear to me from like the rule book or even the explanation in the back, where it's like, hey, we'll explain these more complicated technologies to you. I like sometimes will read those descriptions and be like, I have no further clarification on what it is that I'm trying to find the answer to about this. So I feel like multiple times in the couple plays that we've had to just like make a call where we're like, well, this makes sense, but it certainly doesn't feel spelled out in the rules to me right now.
Yeah, there are lots of gray areas where the technologies meet bonus actions and various things like that.
I think this is one of those games where it's going to benefit from a little bit of time in the the ecosphere. What word am I looking? Guys, it is late and I don't know what word.
The BGG-osphere.
The BGG-osphere, right? And this is a credit to Vladimir Suchi. He's on BGG constantly commenting, kind of clarifying. And I think that if that's something that's like, is if you're listening to this and that's something that's going to really bother you, guys really want to get every little rule right. You don't like kind of making decisions like that at the table and just kind of like flowing with it. I think spend a little time on BGG, make sure BGG is kind of like nearby, and understand that like in a couple of months, I think a lot of that thing is going to be clarified. Yeah. This game still hasn't been released in the US. I think, some of that might even be clarified in the rules. I saw that happen. I keep bringing up Messina, but like the rules that came out for the English edition tweak things a little bit. So I think some of those things are going to kind of iron themselves out. But I agree with you that there's, as we've even touched on this podcast, there's so many layers. We talked about the progress track, and we talked about your individual things and the action cards and the tech trees, which we barely touched on, and the infrastructure. Like all of these things play together. They all change the game. And honestly, I mean, that kind of brings me to like my final like points on this game. Like, sure, there are these like little bits here and there that I'm like, oh, I don't know about that, or I don't know about that, or even just the nature of like the multiple ways to play. Like I'm not a big fan. I know that this is going to frustrate people who are listening to this and like, which way should I play? I cannot tell you. I am so sorry. I hate to break this to you, but I don't know. And if I were you and I was listening to this, I would be annoyed with me too, because that's like I've all I ever want with a game. I'm like, just tell me which way to play to start. I will say play race mode, then at least once, then jump into points mode, play with the action cards, go nuts. And then I don't know
Second
about the modules.
game, play with the action cards. I think that's probably the bigger thing.
Yeah. Commit to playing it twice, and then kind of figure it out. Like, we almost played with the extra modules tonight. We didn't. Now I'm like ready. I'm like, yeah, let's do that. And I don't really like games that have 14 different ways to play, but this is exactly like Nucleum for me. This is a game that you just like commit to exploring it. Explore it. This is gonna be an easier. It's the same weight for, I think, as Nucleum, but it will be an easier teach.
Yes.
It's. I've had just as much fun playing this one as I had playing Nucleum. They are tied for me. They were both fantastic. I'm really loving these games coming out this year. It is so much fun. I don't know which way is the perfect way to play. I don't know if it exists, but just play it, explore it, keep exploring it. Literally. I mean, it's great. It's great. It's got some foibles. It's great. I loved it.
The number of times, especially since we started playing with the action cards, that I would just sit there, we're playing, and I'm just like, I'm having so much fun right now. Like, like nobody asked me. I'm just sitting there like, I'm having so much fun. I want everybody to know how much fun I'm having. I do. Yeah. I mean, Nick covered it a long time ago. It's really fun to do the puzzle. It's really fun while you're playing it. I think I personally don't mind the point scoring as much as other of you do, because I don't know, maybe I've done a pretty good job of focusing on those things. I mean, I've essentially beaten Nick on the tiebreaker twice.
Whatever.
So like I think we're pretty equally competent when it comes to those kind of things. But yeah, I think I know my preferred way to play and the way that I'd like to play it again always in the future. And you know, these action cards, they have icons. They also have text that tells you exactly what it does in English. And I think that helps as well. To the point where it has me wondering, maybe if I teach somebody this game new, maybe I should just throw in the action cards and be like, let's play, you know, we could play race mode or whatever, but just like not even worry about the action cards. Or maybe some weird hybrid where you play points mode, but you don't use the goal cards. You just kind of play points without that. But then that's maybe not enough. I don't know. I guess I agree with Anastasia too. I don't really know what the right way to play it is. The best way to play this is your third play. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Your first couple plays, I don't know. But the best game, it's going to be 3 plays in.
Commit to 3.
Yeah.
Commit to 3. Don't teach this to someone to play once. Like, if you're going to play this, like, at least 2. Like, commit to 2. And even if you go in and do play points mode, fine. But then just play it again, because you're going to need that first play just to figure out. I mean, like John said, it's a weird game. It's weird, but it's cool.
Yeah, it is just so satisfying to push the pieces around. I'm really impressed at how simple the math is, but how much it makes you have to think about and juggle multiple things, and that then makes you be like, oh, but if I do this, I want to sequence in this way, and I want to count these numbers down. And if you're, really getting into it, you're thinking, well, but next turn I need to make sure there's this resource over there on the new world that I can use. And you can go pretty deep on it, but I think that you can also just kind of like, you can play a little bit more by feel and be successful. It won't necessarily punish you for doing that. And yeah, it's a very good feeling game for Euro players. Just the pushing of the pieces. This is a game where just pushing the pieces around is just, it scratches a good itch for me.
Yeah. The journey, the destination's fine, but it's all about that journey.
The journey, yes, totally.
That journey. I know. Even I don't hear this talking from Nick. At the end of our game tonight, I heard Nick, just like right before we ended or something, he was like, "Oh, that's so cool," and I was like, I don't even know what it was, but I think something just worked out for you. And I was just like, And I don't hear you do that often. And I was like, oh yeah, he's loving it over there.
Yeah. Even if I don't care for the scoring, I really like playing the game so much that it like doesn't matter that I have those other opinions, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that's it. I think we have literally nothing else to say. That's a lie. I'm sure we could talk about this for another hour. But this has been really fun exploring it. I am looking forward to playing it more for sure. And I do want to say that anybody listening to this, if you have thoughts, questions, comments, if you've played it and you want to talk about it, please leave a comment on the YouTube version of this episode. You can find a link to it in the description of the episode.
Yeah. And go watch John's tutorial. Maybe you won't have to play race mode. Maybe you won't even need the stumble mode if you go watch him teach you how to play it, save you that, and then
Love
you
the
can just
plug.
dive in. Hey, have fun, y'all. We'll see you soon.